Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, the podcast for makers, by makers, where we talk about all things MYOG. Brought to you by Ripstop by the Roll. I think it's good, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good take.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Ripstop on the Record. I'm Jameson.
And I'm Carter.
On this episode, we are dispelling popular fabric myths. So if you're like us, then you think about fabric probably too much. And that leads to a lot of questions, and especially a lot of myths that we read maybe on Reddit, on Instagram, maybe we just have built up in our head. And we want to talk about those, tell you why they might be wrong, what you might want to think about instead, or maybe why you're right. So we're going to talk about 8 popular fabric myths coming up in just a minute. But first, a few things.
Yeah, we have a few housekeeping announcements. Firstly, 2 days ago, today's the 18th, we started a gift card sale that will run through December 23rd. If you are looking to get a nice little gift for that maker in your life, or maybe just for yourself, head on over to our website. The gift cards are all 10% off. I hope I said that right. I did. So 10% off gift cards. If you're struggling to figure out what to get someone, before I even worked here, actually, I received multiple gift cards for Ripstop by the Roll from my family because, frankly, they had no idea when I started talking about backpack materials and hammocks. They were like, is there like a website or something where we could get used that? So if that strikes true with you, get a little discount, make somebody in your family or yourself just a little bit happier this holiday season.
That's right. Also, holidays, they're really fully upon us now. With Christmas and New Year's coming up, the office will be closed for 1 week. We're going to give everyone some well-deserved time off. That means there will be no order fulfillment as well. So between December 23rd to December 27th, that's a Monday to Friday, we will be off. We will not be in, not be fulfilling orders, things like that. So just as a heads up, if you start putting orders in, please be aware that we will be closed. Make sure you build that into your own personal kind of lead time or fulfillment time. We're going to be taking some time away. That's everyone here. So just please be aware of the office closure. There's a banner on the website as well that'll let you know, just so you can be fully aware. But that does not impact the gift card sale. Obviously, gift cards are just all digital, so nothing really needs to happen there. I want to give a special shout out. I've been doing a lot of research on a couple specific products, getting ready for ski season. I'm super pumped. Got some new ski gear this year, including like boots and helmet and whatnot. And so I'm making a ski bag. And in my research, I came across a company that I've only seen once or twice before. They're called Alpine Sea. Was first introduced to them by Taylor North over at DP. They just make some really cool stuff. I feel like they're really well designed, great aesthetic, just clean lines, great functional gear. So yeah, Alpine Sea, check them out, Instagram, on their website. Just been impressed with some of the design work that they've had.
And as always, the typical spiel. Make sure you like, comment, rate, review, share, subscribe, and buy stuff from us. If you do all those things, we will love you. No, we'll love you either way. But yeah, any help that you can give us, as always, helps us help other people make more stuff. So hope you enjoy the episode.
As we teased in the intro, today we're talking about popular fabric myths. So popular fabric myths get shared in a lot of different ways, whether it's kind of misunderstanding from people, whether it's information that doesn't get disseminated appropriately, or just your classic game of social media telephone through Reddit, Instagram, and such. But knowledge is power, and part of what we want to do here is help makers be more knowledgeable consumers and understand how fabrics are supposed to be used, so you can get the best product possible. So that's what we're going to talk about today. A lot of different things. But first, Carter, you got a little caveat for us.
Yeah, just a quick disclaimer. As Jameson mentioned, the reason that we're doing this is something that we come across in customer service. We've come across it in our own maker journeys. So this is meant to be informative, but also a fun and informal podcast. Most of you know this if you've listened. I'm not a PhD in textiles, chemical, anything like that. I have worked with fabrics for a long time, and I feel like I know a lot about them, but I'm going to do my best to represent all of these myths with the truth as I know it. But at the very least, what we want for you to take away from what we're talking about here is really just kind of calming some of the fears and the, what do they call it? The analysis paralysis that you might encounter. That's something for me, and as I've learned how to make things, was something I wished I could find in a podcast. Is
Yeah, I mean, for my own head, how I like to think about us is application experts, but we're not like research scientists. There's a big difference. We have a lot of experience, but we're not breaking things down to the molecular level. So if you want that information,
Right, and that's not to say that we don't. Obviously, we develop and design, and in some cases produce our own materials, digital print, laser, all that stuff happens in house, and I would call us experts.
definitely.
I'm mostly just giving that disclaimer for the super super smart guy out there that might be like, "Hey, he mentioned something about DWR, and whenever I learned about this carbon chain, I actually learned that it breaks down in 2.5 weeks sooner than you might think," or something like that, where I just don't want people to be, I don't want to misrepresent what we're doing here. But I promise it'll be enjoyable. And I also hopefully promise that you'll get something out of this that'll help you spend that gift card you got that's on sale right now.
You'll take something from it for sure. Okay, number one, technical fabrics are uncomfortable against the skin. What are people talking about when they say stuff like this?
I definitely find this to be more common in those that might not be as experienced yet in specifically like outdoor activities. This is something that when you get started and you're thinking about making maybe a quilt or a hammock or something like that, you might be used to what you can find in a big box store that's generic. And oftentimes those materials are low quality or they might not be optimized in the finishing process to be as comfortable as they can be. One thing that Kyle started out doing from the very beginning is making sure that we were taking specific fabric applications and developing fabrics for those things rather than the other way around. A great example of this would be if you buy Ripstop material from Joann Fabrics and make a quilt out of it. It probably will be downproof because it's usually heavily calendared, but it's not designed. No one's put any thought into that material to make it softer or make it as light as possible. So I do think that there's a myth there where people are worried that if they make a down quilt or even buy a down quilt from someone that we supply material to, that it's going to feel like a trash bag. And I think if you have tried any of the cottage quilts that are out there, you definitely know that something like membrane 10 is a really comfortable material and it feels like a soft teddy bear child thing.
I think
Whatever soft, it feels like that, okay?
I think what a lot of people run into is potentially poor application of some of these high quality materials. For example, I think two of the most common uses or times that I hear people talk about technical fabrics being uncomfortable are with quilts and rain jackets. For those examples, rain jackets, if you're wearing a rain jacket when it's 70 degrees outside, you will get sweaty because the application you're using it in is maybe doesn't provide enough airflow based on the amount of perspiration that you're having. Or if you're using, 20-degree sleeping bag when it's 70 degrees outside, you may feel like you're getting too warm, in which case your body oils will start to feel clammy. What would you say to like how people are applying these things based on their how they perceive the performance of these materials?
It would be hard to give like completely direct application, but I would say that your comfort in a finished good, especially something for outdoor use, is going to be one that's an amalgamation of lots of different things, like making sure you have enough calories, making sure that you're hydrated, making sure that you have the proper clothing. And then another thing really is I think that's why getting custom samples are so awesome. I am someone that has found that I really like a ripstop grid in most materials against my skin because it adds a little bit of friction. Sometimes when something is just a plain weave material, some people might feel like it feels a little bit sticky or gross, and I find that everybody's different. On the other end of the spectrum, there are fabrics that I think have too much extra stuff on them, and they can feel a little bit like Velcro. But I have friends that they love those materials way more than me. So if you're worried about that, I would recommend buying a yard or getting custom samples and really feeling which one might work the best for you.
I think what I'm taking away from this is that technical materials can be uncomfortable against the skin, but it is based on the application and the material that you choose. Some you'll really like, some you won't like. If you haven't liked them so far, you're probably just reaching for the wrong materials.
Right. And I think it's more personal when it comes to quilts, probably. But for hammocks, I honestly can say that all of our materials, even something like a basic 1.9 ripstop, ours in particular is like designed to feel a certain way. Like we work on the finishings and everything to make sure that it will feel good when it's in hammock form. Within those products, you have all different types of weight ranges, which might make the hammock more stretchy or sleep more like a firm mattress. But at the end of the day, the way it feels in your hand is something that we really work on, and so you can't really go wrong with any of our hammock fabrics.
Yeah, it makes sense. So number one, I would say the consensus is that they can be, they don't have to be. Get samples though and test them for yourself. All right, number two, the best insulation is always down. What's your take on this?
This is one that's gone back and forth. I think for a certain period of time, this was true. 20 years ago, down was by far the best thing, and any synthetic insulation was not even close, and it weighed like 60 pounds. It's like your grandfather's sleeping bag that takes up the back of a Tacoma. Just massive and bulky, and down is really the only alternative. Definitely in the past 10 years, but certainly in the past 5, and extremely in the past 2. I just wanted to add another qualifier. Synthetic insulation continues to be more popular since companies are working more and more on things like using recycled materials and stuff like that. I still think that's one area that we want to try to expand on and be creative in, is that as the companies that create these insulations are continuing to do R&D, we want to try to be out there, and eventually what I hope is that there are synthetic materials that are exactly like down in every way. We're not quite there yet, but I think synthetic insulation does outperform almost all down products, specifically in extremely wet and high humidity, high temperature areas, because synthetic insulation basically retains all of its loft value in quilt form or jacket form whenever it gets wet. So you'll still be wet. Don't I think that's another misconception, is that people think that they won't be wet somehow.
You'll be uncomfortable. You'll just be
You'll be
warmer.
warm though.
Yeah.
That being said, down is coming a long way too, right? It used to be that the DWR treated down was really bad and it wasn't really a viable option, but that's also getting to a spot where now it's good. It doesn't just clump up and never go back, which is kind of what it used to be like. So I would definitely say that down is not always the best insulation. One product I can think of specifically is the Enlightened Equipment Torrid Jacket. It's a great balance of handling, like if you're sweating and it gets wet, or if it's raining and you don't want to put on a rain jacket. That is a Climate Shield jacket, and it is super comfortable. It packs down really small. It's extremely light. It's one of the lightest jackets on the market, down or not. And switching it to a down jacket would make it more expensive and not as good, most likely, in my opinion.
I guess one way that I'm thinking about the down versus synthetic insulation conversation is based on activity level. For things where you're like apparel where you will be active in them, I think that synthetic insulation maybe I personally find it to be stronger, a stronger advocate for. Like I think about my Arc'teryx Atom LT jacket, like one of the best, like really like a for cold weather, like one of the best active insulation layers. But then also I think about Alpha Direct. I've just kind of by happenstance been in a couple different cold climates the last couple of weekends, visiting people for Thanksgiving and visiting family and whatnot. It was really cold. I was trying to take runs, and I pretty much lived in my Alpha Direct hoodie. Shout out Tim from Lord MNG for that pattern. My Alpha Direct hoodie, and then like a short sleeve or long sleeve base layer, and that was everything from 50 degrees to like 28 degrees. But that was perfect because of like the active layer. Where if I was wearing down, I just would have been way too warm. Whereas like my
Right.
down quilt from UGQ, the absolute best thing. Like it's like a 20 degree with an ounce of overstuff that all fit down into my pannier for my backpack. Like you wouldn't get those in if you traded insulation for either of those applications.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really think busting the myth there is like super true. Down is not always the best thing. Maybe it was 20 years ago when you didn't have things like all the stuff that Polartec's putting out and Climate Shield and Primaloft and all of those type of things. But now I think you have your choice where you can be really specific about in which application is this insulation the best versus another one.
I've said it before. I'm just going to tease this one more time because I've worn this beanie a lot recently. I used our beanie kit, and then I got the Polartec Alpha Direct with wool. I think it's the 4048, I think.
4048.
Anyway, just get any of our Alpha Directs really and make it into the beanie. That is my favorite beanie of all time. I love that thing so much. It's very nice. Okay, so yeah, that's number 2. Number 3, DCF is a weak textile.
Yes. So this one comes a lot comes mostly from customer service questions that we answer and questions on social media that I see, maybe even debates that I see but do not participate in.
Is
I
that joke
still,
or something?
no, it's just the truth. I see them and I think about it and I'm like, nah, they're having fun. So Dyneema composite fabric has taken the textile world by storm for quite a while. And I think this myth was even stronger 7 years ago, but it's still out there and we still answer this question a lot. I think that just like everything we're talking about, there's an amount of perspective that you want to have.
It's almost like every single answer it depends. Like not like it's not probably a solid answer for any of these.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really what it comes down to is there's not necessarily a binary, but either of the binaries is false, and that's where people often go, especially if they're worried about, for instance, if you're making a stuff sack and you're like, well, DCF, like that stuff's really light. I know that some people say it has low puncture resistance. Should I really be making a stuff sack out of that? Shouldn't I go for 1000 D Cordura because I really need something burly? This is something that it actually plagues people sometimes, and I understand it. But my perspective is this: DCF is used for the world's most popular through hiking tents and has been for the past 10 years. There are more DCF tents on trails than there have ever been. They always last, almost always last the entire through hike or multiple through hikes. DCF is really easy to repair. So oftentimes, yes, you could get a puncture from a flying squirrel holding a knife, but it's really easy to patch up. The same cannot be said for something like sill poly. That's not really a repair that you're wanting to make a lot out on the trail. So I understand that Dyneema composite fabric is expensive, but it is a really incredible material, and I think it's a lot more durable than people give it credit for. So when you're looking to buy a shelter or make a shelter or even just make something like a packing cube, don't discount the material because it's super lightweight or something you've read. I I've owned too much. Sorry to my wife for how many DCF items I've owned and still own.
I own a DCF tent now because Carter sold me one of his.
I've just never had a failure pretty much of any kind. I think the only thing I can think of is I had a zipper pouch that I've been using since 2013 that finally one of the grow grain tabs pulled out. And that was really a sewing error on my part. So and that happened last year. So that was 10 years or something that it lasted. But I do understand this myth comes from people being concerned mainly because the stuff is expensive as heck. And so I get that when you're breaking down the price versus Sil Poly, maybe that is the thing that you're like, well, it is super weak, so I should get the Sil Poly. And maybe you should, but it's a really much more resilient material than people give it credit for. And I think you can see that in the products that are out there on the trail right now.
Carter, Isaac, and I have this joke. Really, Carter teases Isaac and I about this. When Isaac was here, at least, that we would always, whenever he would say like, "Oh, this thing's really strong," or if you allude to how strong something is, then there's this nature within us that wants to test how strong that thing is. And I think that's probably an example of that is he'd be like, guys, check out my new titanium backpacking table. It can hold like 40 pounds. And then we would like, Isaac would just start like bending. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, we said it's really strong. We wanted to see how strong it was. He's like, yeah, it is. Carter's saying like, it is strong, but it's meant to hold like a plate on it. It's not meant to be contorted by like your hands twisting it like it's going to be like a DNA sample.
If you get attacked by Hulk Hogan out of
Yeah.
when you're camping,
And
we're not designing products for that.
I think people apply that same theory to DCF, where people read 15 times stronger than steel, these incredible tear resistant numbers. They read these things and they're like, oh, this should be as light as, this should be 1 ounce and it should also act like 5,000 D Cordura. They conflate these kind of conflicting metrics there. But similarly to you, I've not been using DCF anywhere near as long as you have, but I haven't had any DCF failures or problems in the last 4 years since I started making stuff with them at all. And I have little like tiny little stuff sacks that I bring on every bike ride. I have an inhaler, like this little what I call an O crap kit, should we say? That has like my inhaler, a small roll of medical tape, some trail lube, if you know what I mean, and then like ibuprofen and stuff, and that goes with me everywhere all the time. And that's been DCF for 5 years. It's really janky. Like the roll top's pretty sketchy, but like, that's been thrown in the bottom of 50 bags over the last 4 years, and I've never had a problem. So it's not going to react like, a ballistic nylon, but you don't actually have to do that. I'm never going to drag that thing through a rock field either. So it's going to hold up fine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, another example before we move on is, or another addition to this is, people often talk about the other potential failure of DCF and similar laminates is that you're going to have delamination. That's also just something I mean, I've seen people on Reddit talk about it over the years, but typically not with Dyneema products. I think their lamination specifically is really, really good. Um, I just haven't seen people having trouble with DLAM on any of that type of stuff. So if that's another one of your fears, maybe you'll be the person that this happens to, and if so, I'm sorry. Reach out to me. I'll help you out, and because I'm the one that told you it was okay. But I'm pretty confident in that. It's just not something that I've seen. I mean, my wallet has been. I've had a DCF, like a hybrid DCF 292 wallet. I've carried one of some kind for, like, I think one I had for 5 years, which that's something that has constant abrasion all the time. You're pulling stuff in and out of it. Never had any sort of issues with abrasion or delam. Again, that's only my perspective, but ultimately the myth is this is a weak fabric and it can't stand the test of time, and it should really only be for people that are hiking 50 miles a day or trying to break some sort of record, and I just don't think that's true.
One other thing I will add, like for all these things, this kind of goes for every answer. It's obviously application based, and you need to be careful about how you do these things. One thing I will say for laminate materials, I have had stitches pull out. That is because of construction failure on my behalf. When you're working with laminate materials, make sure that you're taping, binding, using good seam construction, things like that. I think a lot of the failures that people see either come from construction failures on their behalf. Maybe that was some sort of error from the producer or the manufacturer themselves, but that does make a difference. And some of these failures that you've had or that I experienced were not material failures; they were failure for myself to understand how to best work with them. These are real things. All right, that's it for number 3. Number 4, DWR lasts forever.
Yeah, so this one I don't think is as much of a myth, because I don't see people like protesting out in the streets saying DWR was supposed to last forever. I think it's more of kind of an unspoken thing that people might not think about. Maybe it's popular kind of with the Gore-Tex stuff because people know that eventually that stuff wets out. But in general, this is one of the parts that I was talking about with the caveats, is that I'm not a chemist, but I'll try to break this down the way that I know. And even if I might be slightly wrong about the details, I can assure you that the sentiment is correct. Um, so there are different types of DWRs, and they're referred to as C8, C6, and C0. Those are the popular ones. In terms of efficacy, the higher number is the more effective, and this is because of like the length of the carbon chains or something, or the amount of carbon atoms that are in the material, or in the treatment. C8 DWR is pretty much illegal and banned almost everywhere. That's kind of was the nexus for cutting back on PFA, PFC stuff, is that it's pretty harmful for the environment. So now almost all companies are using C6 or C0. So C6 is kind of in the middle. It's much better in general than C8 in terms of the environment, but it's not as effective, of course. And then C0, which is kind of for any new product, and almost all of our products where we can, it's what we use. It's PFC free. So unfortunately, as you make the durable water repellent treatment better for the environment, it also becomes less effective. So you might have to use more, or ultimately it just won't be as good. That goes along with the thought that like we said, it's a myth in the sense that I think people just assume that it's true, that if your fabric is water resistant, meaning it's not coated with a PU coating or silicone coating, but it does have a DWR treatment, that it'll just be like that forever and water will always beat up on it. And that is not the case. Eventually, through washing is the main thing. Washing your gear or just using it over time, that DWR, especially a C0 DWR, is going to break down, and you're going to want to retreat it, or perhaps you don't, it's not that big of a deal and you just use it as is. Depending on how much you use something and how much you wash it is a big portion of that. There are different strengths of DWR, so you can have like a heavier concentration of the coating put on, and normally those are signified by the amount of washes that they'll last. There are actually textile tests for that to see, okay, this treatment will last 10 washes, this one will last 5, etc. One of the good things about outdoor gear for the most part is that we're not really washing that stuff that much. So it's not as big of a deal, except for even for outer wear garments, you're not washing your down jacket every week. So you don't see it as much.
Barely wash my jacket once a season.
This is another small tangent. I'm sorry, but I am a little bit passionate about these myths. I would say that to go along with this, one of the other biggest myths, and please don't get angry with me, is kind of what PFC and PFA, I'm going to use those interchangeably because at this point they're used interchangeably, even though technically they might not be. At least in the textile industry, what I've seen is that they're used interchangeably. Another, unfortunately, is that PFAs are everywhere. So PFAs are in pretty much all of our water. I think it's in 98% of human blood, because household products, environmental products, pretty much everywhere has the presence of PFAs.
Fire retardants,
It's in
cleaners,
basically everything that we have. So that's not me saying. So a lot of times we have people reaching out, and I understand the reason why we're doing this is that we do care. We want to do what we can to be more environmentally conscious and keep our earth as long as we can keep it, and do right by the people that share the world with us, and all that stuff I really do believe in. But having a C6 DWR on your hammock is not going to leach into your skin and like kill you. So that is like, maybe that should have actually been the myth, is that I find as people are understanding more and more about how these like carbon chain DWRs affect the environment, typically it's at the outset of whenever they're made and applied that is the worst for the environment, not once they're on the thing. So again, I prefer to use PFC free wherever I can. So I'm not saying that I'm just walking around with, carbons all over me. It's a scientific way to say that. But it is, maybe it's for the best that people are hyper aware of that, because they haven't been for a very long time. But something to keep in mind, if you do have, maybe we have a product that hasn't switched over yet to PFC free, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to harm you in any way, because likely you already got the PFAs inside of you.
You definitely do.
So take that, again, I am not a scientist or a doctor. I'm actually so far from both of those. But I am concerned about myself and my family, so I've tried to look into that, and I work in the industry, so I hear about it. So anyways, that's Carter's 2 cents, Carter's tip of the week. You do what you want to do, and we'll continue to produce environmentally friendly products whenever we can.
I'm hoping that this DWR and PFAs and PFC conversation is making a lot of you think of things, which is good, because I've been playing with the idea of trying to find a way to do an episode about this. So if you have questions and you have things that you'd like to ask specifically about PFCs, PFAs, PFAOS, whatever, all the different versions, shoot us a message on Instagram. You can send us an email, but please reach out to us. I'm really interested in talking about this and doing more research for our sake as a company, but also yours, the maker. So again, if you have questions, let us know, email us, message us. Please do that. That'd be really cool to get more questions from you all and be able to do an episode about that. Okay, number 5. We're more than halfway through now. Next myth that we're going to bust is you need the perfect thread and needle for each fabric.
Aha, this actually might be the number one.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
We addressed this. We did an episode on thread recently, or no, we had like maybe an email and a blog that went out, a really extensive blog, and we're going to do even more in terms of assimilating the needle and thread into our website at some point, where basically you can look up a fabric and know exactly what thread you should get. The biggest myth here is that there is one that you absolutely should get, and if you don't get it, then your project's going to be messed up, or it's going to be weak or compromised. We do our best to answer this question multiple times per day, and have answered this question since I've worked here. And that's okay. That means one trait that I notice in people that are either small business owners or just making stuff for themselves is that they are detailed people, and so am I. So I get it. But what DIYers normally are also is kind of creative, fly by the seat of your pants type person. And
Don't look at me like
that's
that.
something that I'm here to reinforce, not shame. Um, so here's a big secret. Jameson sews something every single day. He's made things in the past 6 months, from blankets to quilts to fanny packs to backpacks to ski bags to I couldn't even bike bags, all using different materials, different insulations. He has never changed the thread size or the needle size on the machine one time. In fact, we've never changed the thread or the needle size on the machine that we use since I've worked here. So that's a secret, is that all of the projects, in terms of how the needle and thread were working, turned out great. Now, we might have messed up a cut or had to seam rip just because we're bad at making,
Whoa.
but not because of the thread. So this is why, although we want to do our very best to educate you on, smaller thread, smaller needle, lighter fabric, that's still true. And sometimes, really, how I look at it is get a good basis, get some Mara 70 thread and a size 12 needle, a sharp needle, and use that. And if you get to a point where you're testing scraps and you're about to make a super ultralight quilt, make a little test square of all the materials you're going to use. And if you start to have problems, that's whenever you can switch to something more specialized. Really, what I want to empower people to do is, and sorry, Kyle, is not to have to buy extra stuff that they don't need. So you don't have to buy a size 70 needle and Mara 100 thread just because you're using a sub 1 ounce material. You might need to if you have problems, and maybe you just want to make sure you get it exactly right, which is why we're going to tell you. But this myth is definitely busted, and it's the I think the biggest one, that people are worried about. They just don't. They see 1000D Cordura and they're like, I probably need a jackhammer and like a sharpened spear and some rope to sew this, and that's not the case.
All right, I got a couple things. I totally agree. There's not a couple things to like argue with you about. It's more so just additions. One, kind of a funny story and anecdote that I want to include. Uh, Over Thanksgiving, Catherine, my wife, and I went out to go visit Isaac and Camila. You guys know Isaac. We're going to go hang out with them and things over Thanksgiving where they live. And we were spending some time in a place called Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Really cool little town with mountains on the water and everything. There's a leather shop. So we walked in there to go just kind of, walk around, check out the shops. And they had their sewing machine set up in the back. So me being me, I gravitated towards going to check out the machines. And right before Thanksgiving, Carter and I have been working on this thread and needle blog. We're working on this thread and needle tool where you can search for any material and then like it'll tell you recommendations and all this stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, thread and needle were on my brain, right? It's just I've been thinking about it a lot, and they have bags and wallets and all this stuff that they've been working with leather. So I just asked the person, I was like, "Hey, really random question: what size needle do you use?" Just because I was curious, and so knowing that we use 12 virtually all the time, she said they have 20. They use a size 23 needle, which is hilarious to me because I looked at it and it kind of did look like it looked like a house nail. I mean, it was just enormous.
Yeah, and again, that's not me saying that leather shop should use size 12. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking
Yes.
about, our materials are such a focused, even though we have everything from like 7 denier all the way up to 1680D. That's still pretty much a pretty small portion of what you could be sewing, and for the most part, our fabrics are sub 2 ounce.
Yeah.
Especially for the wovens.
Two other things. One, we do have a serger in here. Obviously, serger, thread, needle are kind of different from normal machine stuff. So I did do a lot of sewing on serger stuff. Then also we do technically recommend checking out a ballpoint needle if you're going to be sewing like a lot of apparel items and stuff for obvious reasons. I'll attach the blog below. If you want to read all about thread and needle stuff that we wrote in that blog, go read that more because we're not devaluing all the information that's out there about thread and needle. We're just saying that it's not nearly the hindrance that people fear it may be when they start making their gear.
Yes, this is Jameson keeping me in check here from going off the rails, being a renegade. Yeah, that's absolutely right. All I'm saying is that don't let your fear of not having the exact perfect needle size prevent you from making something awesome. And just from personal experience, it is going to be awesome, and there's not going to be a problem.
What you should think about is getting matching thread so your top stitches look crisp.
Yeah, I would honestly say that's more important. It's like making it look cool and hiding your mistakes. If you had to choose one, I'd probably pick that. But luckily, on our site, you can choose all the sizes and all the colors.
That is not a myth. Top stitching is crucial. Not a myth. That's the truth. All right.
I'm going to do this next one.
Oh, what?
Because I want to hear from the expert. You do way more sewing than me. So let's hear what you have to say. You've sewn on it all. So another myth, if you notice, and I'm noticing this too as we go down this line, myths in our world are often objections or fears that we have because we're making our own stuff or we're starting a small business or whatever, and we don't feel like we know enough or have what it takes. So this one is you can't sew technical fabrics without professional gear. In other words, man, I really wish I could make this Cordura fanny pack that I've seen different versions of it, and I want a different color, and Ripstop by the roll has that color, but God, I'll probably need something like a size 23 needle to sew that. It's just so, I can't do this on my grandma's sewing machine. That is definitely a myth. And Jameson, give us your experience on why you think that's a myth and what the truth is behind the curtain.
Well, like I said, we didn't at all prepare for this, so I was not ready for this answer, but I do have the perfect answer. At least I would think I do, in my opinion. It's timing wise, it's kind of funny. I was just at my older sister's house, and she's making like these little. I actually don't entirely sure what they are. It's like a holistic medicine pouch things that are like children's toys that like I think dangle from the ceiling or something. They say like Epsom salts and like they're like these cute little things that you can hang from your. I think that maybe they're ornaments you can hang from your tree.
I
And they
thought
look
you were
funny.
trying to come up with a creative way to say dime bags of drugs, but
No.
holistic medicine pouches. Sir, do you have anything in your vehicle? Well, I do have some holistic medicine pouches, but it's just Epsom
that's
salts.
pretty funny, especially knowing my older sister, because that's I don't even think that's crossed her brain. Anyway, I was helping her sew, and the machine setup that she had, she'll never listen to this, so I hope she doesn't listen to this because I'm not actually trying to make fun of her. The machine setup, like the thread, the needle. My sister's a classic example of like she learned like all the things of like home ec back in the day, and she knows how to sew. But I take for granted how much I interact with sewing and how much I've learned from you and talking to people in the podcast. And frankly, I practice a lot of sewing in there, so I just take advantage of how much information I have. And her setup was all wrong. I'm so sorry, Juliana. But every like the thread, the needle, she's like, oh, I've never changed my needle. I had this machine for like 15 years. And I was like, oh my God, what are you? Then like the size needle was like a size 16. It was a denim needle. And then she had like 50 thread or no 80 thread or something. Like, what are you doing? It was so hard to sew, but she oversold this amount of things. She needed help. She needed to get them done in a couple of days. So I helped her sew, and we sewed like 130 things that night. We stayed until like 1 a.m. just sewing, just like assembly lining it. The sewing experience was pretty bad. I say all of that. That whole background is because we had a bad sewing setup with kind of the wrong needle and the wrong thread, and those things turned out perfectly. They are perfectly fine. Like they are functional beyond belief. They look good. Like this was the least professional setup possible. No offense, Juliana. You did really awesome.
Man, you're really worried she's going to listen to this and like beat you up or something.
Yeah, I bought
third apology.
Yeah.
You're going to get a FaceTime from the family.
She's probably going to FaceTime me during this episode just because she's a daughter now and we FaceTime all the time. But yeah, the worst setup ever. That everything still turned out perfectly. So I say all of that. I'm getting to a point, which is I think your machine can kind of be anything. I don't think you need any remotely interesting machine. In fact, the older or the less interesting, probably the better. The one thing I would say that really does help is having kind of the right tools. They don't even need to be professional tools, but that was the thing that I really went hard with my sister is I got to her house and we started sewing and she didn't have thread snips. She didn't have wonder clips. She didn't have scissors that worked. And I just went on Amazon in the moment. I was like, we're taking care of this right now. I cannot help you sew if we don't have thread snips and wonder clips at all. So get the right tools, which luckily those are like real cheap. I spent $30 total and got her everything she needed on Amazon. But tools, you want the right ones. Sewing machine, you really don't need anything good.
Yeah, I mean, and for that reason, we sell a sewing machine that we use in the shop. We use it in all our videos. It was one of the first sewing machines I ever got before I worked here. In fact, we still have the one that I used before I worked here, and it still works just fine.
The other thing I would say is that I think the professional gear is pretty relative too. We know a lot of professionals, quote, around professionals that use home machines and quote unquote like cheaper machines for their professional gear. Like anything can be professional if you're making it and if you have the skills to do it. So like I think what people think of is industrial machines or long arm machines or cylinder machines or bar tack stuff like that. And we also know plenty of cottage companies that don't even have those machines that make gear that lasts years and years.
Yeah, industrial products are, I think, for the most part, compared to modern sewing machines, they are going to last longer, but longer is relative, right? It's like, all right, this one's going to last 70 years and this one's going to last 40 years or whatever. You're also going to pay a lot more for that. So I think industrial gear comes into play whenever you're sewing at scale and you need to produce a ton of products every single day, or you're working with heavy materials stacked on top of each other every single day, and you need something with extra power. It's cool if you have an industrial machine. I got one for the convenience. Having something that cuts the thread for you, does the back tacks for you is awesome, and it's really cool, and it does make the process more enjoyable. Uh, at least for me. But it's certainly, there's no reason that you can't make basically any something out of any of the fabrics that we sell outside of really tough and thick stuff like 2 layers of foam and webbing and 2 layers of thousand D Cordura. You might have to reach out to you might have to phone a friend on that one.
I've found industrial machines have two things that home machines don't. Um, Speed, like you're quicker on industrial machine, whether it's a bar tacker, other things like that. They're just quicker because they can back tack, they can cut the thread, they move really quickly, they move really smoothly, they don't bounce. Like they're quicker, and then they're also just more efficient. Like you can sew quicker, but you can also just like get through things. They're meant for an industrial type of landscape. Like, and then there's a little bit of power. Like you will get more power. You can get more power to Carter's point, if you're sewing through multiple layers of foam and you're doing like I don't know ballistics and defense level sewing stuff, that's going to be weird. But
And even then, industrial machines also have different levels to them, just like needle and thread,
yeah,
where the industrial machines that I have are designed for light to medium sewing. So they're not, I mean, yes, they are more powerful than a regular home singer machine, but not by much. And I don't run them at top speed. If you were wanting to sew with vinyl and stuff like that, you would get a heavier duty machine, industrial machine, anyways, that's designed for that. So it's not like your only choice is a home machine and then all industrial machines are the same. There's still an even bigger jump where you would need to get something that's like a real big daddy, as they call it in the industry.
before we move on to number 7, I also want to do an episode about how to purchase an industrial machine. We talked to Matt Evans from Redpaw just last episode about this, and he's got some really good tips. I think we'll do that episode in the future, but if you have specific questions or things you want to know about how to buy an industrial machine, what to look for, please let me know. I would obviously, I'll build an outline as good as I can, but you all, I'm sure, have really good insight and good questions to ask for those of you that have gone through it or are looking to go through it yourself. So go check that out, or please let us know. Instagram, email, just let us know and see if you have any questions. All right, Carter, I'm throwing this one back over to you because I want you to answer stuff more. Number 7, the seventh myth that we're going to dispel: fabrics that include a ripstop grid are always stronger.
Yeah, I think this is, well, our company's called Ripstop by the roll, right? So from from the outset, I think people are surprised when you go on our website and it's not just ripstop nylon, right? We have huge list of custom synthetic fabrics that are designed to do all types of different things. And
Actually, good point. That's the ninth myth that I'm having trouble saying myth and dispel. That's the ninth myth I want to dispel for us, is that whenever I talk to people at our company and they say, "Oh, it's Ripstop by the Roll," like, "Oh yeah, I know Ripstop." Like, "Oh, you guys know Ripstop by the Roll?" Like, "No, I know Ripstop." They think Ripstop and Ripstop by the Roll are always the same thing. That's the first myth. Ripstop is not intrinsically ours.
yes. So this is another one that like kind of gets into a little bit of textile philosophy, I'll call it. And I've talked about this before. Um, but a ripstop grid can help with bias stretch in a fabric. It can increase the tear strength, um, but it's not the only thing that affects how a fabric performs, and it's not always better than something that doesn't have it in terms of tear strength. So a big contributor for the broadest sense uh, of a fabric's performance is going to be fiber, and then fiber weight or denier. So, for example, you could, let's say you have a 100D fabric that's made of nylon. It's a 100D plain weave, no, or 100D ripstop fabric, like 100D Robic. It's a really good fabric, has a nice grid ripstop. And then let's take something like 100D Venom, our 3.9 Venom. That's 100% UHMWPE. So those are both 100D, and Robic has the ripstop and the Venom doesn't. The tear strength difference on those is outrageous. The Venom is by far much higher in tear strength, and it doesn't have a ripstop grid, and they're the same denier. But the difference is both the thread count and also the fiber is a UHMWPE fiber, which is much higher in tear strength. It's also lighter, even though they're the same denier. So this is just something that at face level, especially someone that doesn't know too much, or they might have only, all they know is I need a 70D fabric because that's a popular parachute nylon weight of fabric. And they think that, oh, it has a ripstop, that's the way to go. But you might have another 70D material that is nylon 6,6, which is a slightly different chemical makeup of nylon. And it doesn't have a ripstop, but it's actually a higher performer in tear strength. I know there's lots of examples of this, but another one is that when you apply a coating to something, in a lot of ways, it kind of negates or at least heavily waters down how the fabric is woven. So, for instance, a silicone coating, especially a high quality silicone coating on a material, heavily increases the abrasion resistance and the puncture resistance and the tear strength. So, you could have a 1.1 ounce ripstop material and then a 1.1 ounce material that's coated with silicone. And almost always, the coated with silicone material, given that it's the same fiber, is going to be much stronger. So the myth is, hey, if it says ripstop on it, then it's automatically just going to be stronger. And that's just not true. And we try and we'll continue to try to explain those differences and have more data sheets so that you can compare side by side. But yeah, I do think that's a big myth that people, they look at it and they say, well, it's going to stop rips. It will never rip. And that's just not what that means.
One thing I never thought about until right now is how the name Ripstop sort of has become the umbrella term for any grid stop or grid pattern at all. And it is kind of misleading. Like it does remind me of when I first heard of ripstop material at all. I think I was maybe 7 years old. One of our family friends was in the military, and they just got the new uniforms back in 2002 or something. And he was showing me like the patches and everything, and he's like, "Oh, I rip my or can roll my sleeves up," but like our uniforms are made out of ripstop material, so like if you catch on something, then then it doesn't keep zippering open. And now that's sort of become the standard term for all ripstop stuff. When like what you were talking about earlier, the ripstop in our 5.2 airwave stretch is for texture, is for breathability, is for comfort. Doesn't necessarily stop it from doesn't change the tear strength really much at all. But it's kind of become like the umbrella term for any grid pattern whatsoever.
Well, I think, yeah, I might say that a little bit differently in that it usually will change the tear strength, but depending on the thread count and how much that ripstop grid contributes to the thread count and how thick the grid is, it probably will help. Like it will,
Yeah.
depending on the denier, it's going to help it. However, it's not, by no means is it the only contributing factor to fabric durability in terms of tear strength and abrasion, but sometimes it's it like just because something has a ripstop and everything else is the same except for one other change to we have A material that has a ripstop grid and B material that has a different treatment. Like there are such things as tear strength coatings where you can actually just treat the fabric in certain ways to up the tear strength. So you could have those side by side, and the ripstop might be weaker. So all that to say, I prefer ripstop grids. I do think that they have their place. I think they look nice, and for the most part, they definitely are functional. But it's another spot where someone might look at our website and see that something says ripstop and choose that material, not realizing that, oh, I could have gotten Ultra 100. Right.
Sure.
I think that's another example where Ultra 100 doesn't say ripstop on it, and you're like, oh well, that's nowhere near as strong as Hyper D 300. grid or whatever,
Yeah.
or that's nowhere near as strong as 1.9 Ripstop because it has Ripstop, and you would be mistaken.
Yeah. Another example of Ripstop that we haven't exactly touched on yet, and it's somewhat related to this myth, is that Ripstop can also just be for aesthetics. Like some materials, it just looks really good, and it may have some function in it as well. We're not saying we throw Ripstops in just for attractive levels, but it does change the aesthetic and kind of the visual presentation of a material to have a Ripstop material in there as well.
Yeah, I think it looks cool. I like them.
Yeah.
I like the way they drape across your body.
I also like that. Number 8, the eighth and final myth that we're going to dispel today. If you've liked this episode, let us know. We've said it a million times already. Send us a comment. Drop us if you like this. If you have other myths you want to hear us talk about, well, you can do it too. All right, the eighth and final one is you need hydrostatic head to be as high as possible for functional gear.
Yes, this is one that
You're passionate about this one.
this is just one that, again, I think people are really excited about making something, or they're curious about picking one product over another, and this is something that gets people hung up because, for the most part, textile tests, of course, are exactly what they are. They're empirical laboratory tests that are designed to give you comparable data in between textiles or fibers, and that's necessary. It's sometimes really helpful, but other times it's also a hindrance to someone who's trying to buy something. And what I mean in terms of hydrostatic head is that, for the most part, industry standard for a really long time was 1,000 millimeters of hydrostatic head. I won't go into the full details of what that means, but let's just say the lower the number, the easier that it is for water to eventually penetrate the fabric under pressure. Um, that 1,000 millimeters, if you imagined a cylinder filled up with water up to 1,000 millimeters worth of water, that would be the amount of water weight and pressure that it would take to penetrate through the fabric to the other side, in the form of multiple droplets not less than or more than 3 millimeters away from a clamp. So again, that sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, because in some ways it is. Most of the shelters that you're going to find at REI are 1,500 millimeters of hydrostatic head or less. And for the most part, when they're constructed properly, that's not an issue. Another example of this would be 210D HDPE grid stop. That's a fabric that's been around for longer than I've been working here, or even knowing about fabrics. And I've seen fabrics like that measure anywhere from 500 millimeters to 1,500. But I rarely see, frankly, I've never seen anyone complain about water getting through it, because for the most part, you're making a backpack out of it. Inside your backpack, you're using a liner or dry bags or binding or whatever. You're using some form to protect, because it's not completely waterproof. And for most production packs, even at DCF and Challenge Ultra and stuff like that, a lot of companies are also binding those, so they're not fully waterproof. So
Just as a little bit of context, I think the highest hydrostatic head rating I've ever seen is 30,000, and that's on something where it's like Dyneema, where it's plastic coating, where it's completely impenetrable unless you just shoot water through it with a jet. But another example, I just looked it up. Our 1-1 Steel Poly, I have 2 shelters made out of that. There's thousands of shelters, hundreds of thousands that are made with that material. That's got a hydrostatic head rating of 2,000. I've been in some downpours in my. I'm thinking of my hammock tarp. It just doesn't. You don't have problems. Like that's not like even if the highest rate I've ever seen is 30,000, 2,000 doesn't mean you're getting wet out.
yes, and I think that's the whole point of the myth, is that, there's one side that I was talking about, which is like, for packs and stuff, you don't need it to be that high, because the chances of your pack being completely waterproof are really low. And even at those lower measurements, it's still not enough for water to get through, unless it's really close to zero. Or at least, if it's above 1,000, you're good. But the other side is shelters, yeah, where it can be confusing to look at something that says 2,000 and then look at something that says 4,000, and you're like, oh, this one's double as waterproof. And that's a technical truth in the sense of the hydrostatic head laboratory test, but it's not an applicable truth to a finished product. And so I often see people worried about that. And just like Jameson said, we have lots and lots and lots of Sil Poly out there, and I haven't ever heard of a failure of the silicone coating. As long when you're using a dialed in high quality silicone coating and you're storing the fabric properly, 2000 especially is more than enough to prevent misting. So that's something that when the original sil nylons came out, the coatings weren't as quality, and just in general they weren't as good as they are now. So some people would have what they call misting, where you would have it raining on the outside, but a little bit of water would get through. Now, sometimes that was true and that was happening. I haven't really heard of that at all for our products, especially anytime. But some of that was also like condensation that people thought was water getting in, but it's actually their breath. So, anyways, if when you look at hydrostatic head, yes, it's important. Yes, it can be a good way for you to really compare. And if you need something to be submersible or something like that, absolutely go for the highest that you can find. But understand that that is a laboratory test, and then there's an interpretation of what that really means for your product. And if you haven't seen the theme here yet, I've mentioned it a few times. I think it's more about analyzing to make sure that you spend your money well and that you make good choices and make awesome products. But also, we're not don't get so caught up in that you end up with, a PU coated 47-pound shelter because you wanted it to be waterproof, because that's not really what that means. So, anyways, I'll step off my soapbox.
One thing that this reminds me of is well, I say you because you've been the one that's talked about it on the podcast as well as blogs, but the fabric application triad. Earlier, I said that we're kind of application experts. Application is really important, and it's sometimes really hard to get right because of the nuance and the grandeur of technical materials and the options that are out there. So understanding the application that you need is almost always one of the most important things that you can do. I mentioned the fabric application triad because that's going to help you prioritize what it is you're looking for in your material and in your project, which is going to help you make good decisions. But for all of these myths, the answers are all it depends, because it's going to be based on what your project is. So the fabric application triad, go look at the blog. I'll attach it below in the description, but weight, price, durability, if you can prioritize those and know exactly what it is you want your project to do and what you want your your product to accomplish, you will be so much better off having a defined goal for what you want to do and being able to choose materials based on that, because you won't be fighting against these myths. You'll understand them and be able to just make around them.
Yeah, and the final thing I'll say is, like we said from the top, this is supposed to be fun and informational. So, in really what I want to get across is, hey, we're going to help you no matter what. So, if you hear this and you think, oh, well, now I'm worried about reaching out and asking which tarp material I should buy. That is not at all what I mean. We're always going to be here to help you and answer these questions. It's really more for some entertainment. Maybe you get a little more information so you can make a better choice for yourself. And, let's face it, we have great customer service, but nobody really wants to reach out to customer service. If you can solve the problem yourself and get something ordered with that new gift card that you just got that was on sale and will be until the 23rd, then that's just better for everybody. So hopefully we gave you some insight into how you can make better decisions about different fabrics, and maybe a fear that you're putting too much weight into. But if not, hit us up. We're going to help you. And yeah, it was fun.
I think the maker equivalent of you pack your fears is you make your fears. you,
yes.
You sow your fears. I never thought about that before either. I definitely done that.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that wraps it up. Thank you everybody for listening, putting up with us, and shout out to Tim Brunetto.
Yeah, you only talked about weapons once today too. That's pretty good for you.
That was a one-time deal.
That was just last episode, two episodes ago, whatever it was. All right, as always, thanks everybody. Like, comment, rate, subscribe, review, everything Carter said earlier. Let us know if you want to hear another episode. If you have any ideas or questions, send us on Instagram or email us. Till next time, thanks everybody.
Thank you.